stories.
Please don't kill me. I have a lot to live for. I have a wife and kids.
A few years ago, I found a story online that hit me. Not many of them do. It was a very long fictional story, and it was written incredibly, brutally well. If you are a fan or familiar with Poppy Z. Bright's writing and romance style, it was like that, and I absolutely fell in love with it, particularly the author's writing style. I'm keeping this vague because this guy is some kind of well-known, at least in certain parts of the internet, and despite all of this, I still have mixed feelings on him. We'll get on that though. This story stuck on me, and I bookmarked it knowing I'd want to read it again eventually. About a half a year passed, give or take, and in the time, the computer I'd saved it on shit the bed, so when out of nowhere I got to thinking on that story again, wanting to reread it, I had to hunt it down all over again. I remembered bits of it had been on DeviantArt, and I started there, figuring that scraps and teaser bits might lead to the full story. I found the author's website instead, which had links to actually buy the damn thing, which made my day. I managed to refine the story online, wish-listed the physical copy, and then found that the author, who I'll refer to as Sam from here on out, had several social media links up. One of them was Tumblr, which I was sadly a pretty avid user of at the time. I shot him an anonymous message, as was my habit at the time, lauding his wonderful writing and lauding the impact it had taken on me, following him on the site immediately after. Somewhere around this point, I got the guts up to write him personally, and despite how silly it sounds and felt at the time even, I was almost ecstatic when he responded. We started emailing back and forth due to Tumblr's tiny word limit, and eventually the waiting time led quick enough to chatting on Yahoo Messenger. Around this point, I was having a lot of emotional issues. I've dealt with severe depression and anxiety for more than half of my life. If I ever post some of my other experiences, a lot of that will make sense, and it was an awesome distraction. He was a huge Stephen King fan, as am I, and we bonded on that right off the bat. From the first night we talked, we were sharing music preferences, sending little bundles of songs we thought the other might like. It was nice, and it was a pleasant surprise since the songs he suggested I actually did wind up liking. Things changed, and sometimes I kick myself for not seeing it coming, because he wasn't exactly opaque about his oddities, but I blame a lot of it on how much respect I'd built towards this man, on his writing capacities. We talked a lot. He started sending me videos, mostly everything and anything of Ross Williams. Sam was obsessed with Ross, and obsessed with hating Valorcand, the singer who took over after Ross committed suicide. I'd never known much about Ross's music or ideas, and I'll totally confess that I was intrigued after hearing a bit of it. I could sympathize with Sam's rage, too. Here was this brilliant artist who had just hit his breaking point and given in to it, and his legacy was being eradicated by this guy, Valor. It just got ridiculous, though, and I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. Sam was obsessed with gore. I went through a heavy Gorechin phase when I was younger, so it didn't faze me at first, but after a while it just really got suffocating, unnecessary, and way over the goddamn top perverse. Don't get me wrong, he was never offensive and never made a single uncomfortable advance towards me. The farthest it had gone at this point was him telling me I was lovely and to stop thinking poorly of myself, which I honestly appreciated and still do. Just constant commentary about his boys and what he wanted to do to them. Everything was a fetish to this man. Medical, Absolutely. Contestants, totally. Musician he respected, on their knees, vomiting and having breakdowns. Fuck yeah. It's like there were no boundaries, no off limits, an absolute lack of real respect because everything had to be perverse, everything had to be fappable. It was annoying, but not disconcerting until he started telling me about his relationships. Here, I actually feel a bit guilty, but hell, I'm in this far. He insisted that he was in a romantic relationship with two ghosts, his two pet ghost boys. I'm a believer in the paranormal, and I have seen some damnably strange shit in my life, but still, I just couldn't take it. I never said it to his face, and technically, I'm not calling it outright impossible, but it was just too goddamn much. Way too goddamn much. He'd tell me about visiting Jeffrey Dahmer on the other side and partying with him. Like, what? Really? Seriously? What the fuck, dude? Referred to everyone that wasn't him or someone he approved of as mortals or humans. Like a fucking 12-year-old kid hitting their Anne Rice years. Just, ugh. So many things. Somewhere in this mess, he told me he had multiples. But they weren't multiples, and some weren't human. But they are totally more than ghost. I don't even fucking know. It just kinda piled. It started to get way worse, mostly with him freaking out inexplicably and going on about they and them were saying it was the XUL, but I don't even have the patience to get into that clusterfuck. And at some point much earlier, in a moment of utter idiocracy, I'd given him my boyfriend's phone number. My phone at the time was out of commission, and Lucas' phone was the only one really solidly working in the house, and he offered numerous times for me to call and text this guy when our internet crapped out. We texted a few times, and once or twice Lucas and him would trade messages. The first night I'd talked to him on Skype face to face, it'd been both Lucas and I because I'm desperately awkward on Skype for some goddamn reason. He started texting constantly, 5 a.m., 3 a.m., 11 p.m., just really fucking unnecessary hours. I don't work a 9 to 5 job because of my previously mentioned issues, but Lucas does. And just because I don't sleep for days on end doesn't mean that he doesn't. This guy just did not seem to get that. He'd get cranky when I signed off to make dinner, signed off to try and sleep, signed off to try and spend time with my boy. It started to feel like I was his only friend, and I began to first seriously suspect that, and then later completely believed it. Somewhere in the realm of 5 months of us talking, he'd been getting much worse, talking about his dead boys incessantly when he wasn't spamming my inbox with either videos, songs, or pictures of Ross, complete with paragraphs of fanatic gibbering. When it got just fucked up, downright completely fucked up, I couldn't check my fucking email without him seeing me as online and hitting me immediately with 4 or 5 messages. I'd stopped going online for days on end, and when I came back, he was like a cat that hadn't been fed in a fucking week, just up my ass and suffocating. I'm a musician, and an acquaintance of mine invited me out of the blue to a casual open mic night. I was freaking out, trying to decide whether I should go or not, and texted him to get input. He'd gotten excited and told me something along the lines of, "If you think you can, I think you definitely should." So that was it. Him, Lucas, and another friend all saying go for it, and I caved. When I told him it was on, he seemed pretty happy for me and told me to tell him all about it. When I got back, me and Lucas walked down there. I played a few songs, and it went amazingly well. I was absolutely buzzed for hours afterwards, as it had been the first time I'd played any kind of live in almost 10 years, and it went so good. Later that night, around 10ish, I think, I texted him to tell him how good it had gone. He was incredibly bitchy in response and immediately sounded like the kind of significant other or spouse that'll push you to go have fun or do something you want for the express purpose of attempting to guilt or berate you about it later. That got me irritated, but I was entirely too pleased to care much, so I tried to drop the conversation. He apologized at some point, asked to call me, and I accepted. What followed was 3 hours on and off of him either drunk to borderline time travel excess, having a full psychiatric break, or drugged out to the point where even Keith Richards would be concerned. He started talking in different tones, different voices, talking about himself in third person. Like I mentioned earlier, he supposedly had some kind of alters that he would later begin sending me messages as, designating the personality shifts, of course, by changing the colors of the fonts. And I'm not going to count that out completely, but holy shit. He started saying incredibly strange things when he wasn't sobbing so hard that the sound cut out, one of which still freaks me out to this day. He'd be mid-sentence crying and screaming about how they did this to him, I've seen him and it's killing him and they did it. And then, clear his throat, calmly apologize and ask me how the open mic night thing went. It was during one of these quiet bits where he started talking in one of the creepiest fucking voices I've ever heard, though I still can't explain why it shook me up so bad. I don't remember how it went exactly, but I still got the gist of it. I was in the middle of trying to explain how the thing went, and he cuts me off in this weirdly soggy, gravelly voice that I could hear the crazy smile in. They're not like you. You know, you didn't belong there with those things. I stopped and I asked him to repeat or at least clarify, and he just essentially rephrases it, saying something like, you felt as out of place as you were, and they knew it. They all knew it. Here's the odd thing. This kid that invited me works with my mom and knows me more by face and reference than personally, and had either of us known more about each other, I'd probably never would have gone. They are super hippie, like can't go more than a few words without talking in the soft, hushing tone about Earth Mother and the man. The only other musician I remember that night was a guy in his 60s playing a ridiculous signal-like song called All Fracked Up. Use your imagination what that was about. And here's Sam making this absurdly accurate comment for no reason. No, nothing. Just fuck. It sounds so stupid, but it terrified me. He starts asking me in the same god-awful voice, how drained do you feel right now? How much of you did they steal? And I'm just noping so fucking hard. It sounds downright ridiculous, sitting here and writing it out to strangers, but I lived it, and it just, yeah. This continues for a few minutes until I have to ask him to repeat himself again, and he breaks back into screaming at me at how I better know who he's talking about by now, and intermittently asking me how could anyone not love Ross. I mean, how dare they? He also hung up on me a handful of times, ending with fuck this once and fuck you the next. When we actually talked the following morning, he put it on being wasted as fuck. A few months later, he called me again, right around 5 in the fucking morning, and talked for 4 goddamn hours about Ross and how he felt that the world was prejudiced for now acknowledging his dead boys. Another time around that point, he called me again, absolutely livid because his ex was purportedly a semi-well-known model and had the audacity to mention Ross's name. There isn't much of a conclusion to the story, and if you stuck with me this far, I appreciate it. The crazier he got, and the less we actually had any kind of conversation, the less I talked to him. I spent less time online, stayed much more neutral in response instead of humoring him, etc. It luckily just kind of faded. There have been a few moments though, like the time he spammed my email with requests to jump on board some mass reporting spree he was doing on Tumblr because someone's opinion was hate speech to him. Or when his car was stolen and he sent me a 15-message diatribe written almost exclusively from a we and a our perspective. While I appreciate the occasional WTF in my inbox and wish this guy some kind of sanity or peace, let's not meet again, Sam, and for fuck's sake, let's never meet in person. So I just got home and I was walking up to my apartment. This Mexican dude on a bike asked me if I had a ratchet he could use to tighten the bolts on his bike wheel. I could have just said sorry, I don't, and been on my way, and none of this would have happened. I got my socket set from my car and handed it to him, the 3/8 and the wrench, and he was telling me this story about how he was in his friend's car and was chased by cops. I didn't really give a fuck because people out at 2 a.m. on a bike almost universally had a shit day and have something to complain about. He said afterwards he asked the guy if he could get the fuck out of the car, so he took his bike and ended up here. He said he just needed to fix his bike real quick so he can go home. I thought he lived here at my complex at first, so being my dumbass, I asked him if he needs a ride. He accepted, and I opened my car so he can put his tiny bike in the back of my car. On the way, he continued with his story. He said he was with some guys he barely knew in this white boy's 5.0 Explorer to get some, and I started to freak out a little bit. He said they were going to that spot on Pico's, and he looked at me with a sideways glance and said, "I think you know what I'm talking about." I just kind of nodded like, yeah, whatever. Apparently there was a hot drug spot on Pico's. He was talking about his dope habit and how it costed him. Like, he has a daughter and a wife that needs to be there for. He said he had a car, but it needs a new alternator, and he's been putting it off for almost a year now because he's been so occupied with finding dope. As he is telling me all of this, I realize that he's all kinds of geeked out and hyper. At one point, he asked what time it was and freaked out when I told him 2:30 a.m. because he thought it was like 6 a.m. and it was super early. So he's in this white boy's 5.0 Explorer to get dropped off at home after dropping by Pico's. Apparently, the driver starts driving up fucking US 36 to Boulder because it's a shortcut and there aren't any cops. everyone gets all pissed off at the driver because one of them wanted to go home and tweak out. Driver decides to just stop at a gas station and argue about it. When they finally pull out at the gas station, a cop starts following them, like obviously on their ass, but with the lights off. The driver fucking punches it and barely misses cars because the driver is so high, the cop doesn't even pursue, and they end up just hauling around town, and the Mexican dude tells the driver to stop and let him the fuck out, which is how he ended up at my complex at 2 a.m. We pull up to this apartment building, and this motherfucker is so hyper, he grabs his bike out of the back and nearly forgot his backpack in the front seat. He grabs it, and I start worrying that some of his shit, I didn't want anything from his backpack in my car and didn't want to piss him off by looking for shit as soon as he gets out. So I said, "Oh shit, I think you dropped something." We both start scouring under the passenger seat looking for anything. We didn't find anything, so he says, "Okay, good. I didn't want you to drive around dirty because of me or anything." I put my seats back up and lean on my car. This motherfucker just keeps recalling different parts of the story in varying levels of detail, and he won't stop talking. I didn't want him to get pissed off at me and cause any type of conflict, so I just kinda angled my body away and fiddled with my keys. He invited me up, and I said, "Nah, I need to go home. It's like 4 a.m. It was 2:30 something in reality. I finally start reversing out, and the motherfucker knocks on my window. He just says, "Bruh, do you have a cigarette?" And I just say, "Nah, I don't smoke." He kind of looked at me weird and says, "Aight, man, God bless, have a good night." I kind of regret doing that, even though I just tried to be a good stranger. I don't know. So good luck, man, but let's not meet again. If you are new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.